All right, Doug, good morning. There are lots of news events we could talk about today, but instead we're going to divert our attention to the esoteric and just see where it takes us. So these are actually questions submitted from one of our viewers. And here we go. First one is, what's your thoughts about the big unknowable metaphysics, nature of reality, good and evil, and the relationship between conscious consent, free will, and predestination?
Yeah, well, that's real meat life stuff, actually. So, what's
Got to kind
metaphysics?
of break it apart even to start with it.
We're going to start with that. Metaphysics. Uh, that's all about the fundamental nature of reality itself.
Mm.
And it's about life, the universe, and everything, which I think was that book by Adams. Yeah, the one where space aliens had posted a notice that the Earth was going to be bulldozed and eliminated, but it was in an office where no Earthlings could reach it, and he's scooped up in a spaceship, and it's called God,
Yeah, I
Hitchhik-
know.
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yes. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So when I think about things like metaphysics and the meaning of life, um, I actually think about comedy as much as anything else. I certainly don't go in for reading, you know, deep philosophical tomes and such, because I don't think you can get to the bottom of it. Everybody is just a blind man uh, walking around in a dark cave. Nobody really understands any of these things.
So
But
you think not Aristotle, not Sartre, not Nietzsche, none of those people. They're not going to give you any idea about the metaphysics and what the universe is really all about. But some comedy might give you better clues.
yeah, it actually does. It actually does. My own view of reality is, as you know, I'm partial to solipsism, and solipsism has many varieties, but basically, it's the idea that reality is a creation of your own mind. It's actually a figment of your imagination. Uh, in its extreme form, you say that nothing is real, it's all something that's created in my mind. Or maybe it's the common creation of everybody's mind. Well, that does that contradict the basic laws of physics that we've done so much to explore in, in
But even the laws of physics, Doug, have gotten more extraordinary in the last several decades anyway, right? I mean, they don't even make sense anymore.
no, they doesn't. We're basically the laws of physics essentially boil down to the material world doesn't exist. Nothing really exists. In fact, even when you look at the universe and you think, well, there's the stars, there's the galaxies, and the galaxies have only been discovered as being galaxies. And there are hundreds of billions of galaxies. Each of them have hundreds of millions or billions of stars. And they were only discovered 100 years ago. I mean, so we're still babes in the wood. We don't know anything. So you can believe almost anything that you want. And I mean, I don't know. Look, the nature of reality. So what's important? I mean, uh, he asked about good and evil. Okay,
Yeah.
and even defining something like good and evil is hard enough. I mean, if I was going to try to define good, I'd say, well, good is the pursuit of truth, it's the pursuit of justice, and evil is the initiation of force and the destruction of living matter pointlessly with bad intent. And of course, you can parse all these words and the reasons why people might do that. And I'm not sure that you even get to the basis of things there.
Hmm.
It's uh, it's the these are unanswerable questions. I mean, as close as anybody's come to it might be Monty Python's movie, The Meaning of Life, which is hilarious incidentally. I saw that in a theater in South Africa where I was the only white guy in a theater full of black people. And I was just laughing my head off. They thought, who is this crazy white man? But it was such a funny movie. I'd like to see it again. And of course, going back to Monty Python and the Meaning of Life, I love The Life of Brian too. It gives you a little bit of insight of it, especially at the end of it, where Brian is hanging on a cross and he's singing Always Look on the Bright Side of Life. So that's kind of the way I see things. But look, I never met Alan Watts, but I read his book, The Way of Zen, when I was in high school, and I was mightily impressed by it. And I thought, if there's anybody in the current world that would understand the answers to these questions about metaphysics and the big unknowables, perhaps it would be Alan Watts, who's investigated philosophy of all types for his entire life. It turns out, and I don't know if I've mentioned this before, that I later became, quite close friends with the guy that was Alan Watts' best friend. So I asked Bob, who's since joined the choir Invisible. I think he committed suicide, but I'm not sure. But he was a very wise and mellow guy. I said, listen, did Alan ever figure out what this is all about? Was he a happy camper with the nature of reality? And Bob said, no. Alan was actually kind of upset and confused, and that's why he smoked too much, among other things. So there's somebody who's very smart and very eloquent and very thoughtful and looked into it as thoroughly as anybody can, and they didn't really come up with the answer. So, what's my answer? I guess I've just given her. I don't know, and I'm not sure that we'll ever know. I mean, when did the first caveman who thought about these things figure it out? Did Aristotle or Plato, did they actually figure these things out? Well, they certainly wrote a lot about things of this nature, but there's no real answers.
But how do you how do you then deal with the fact that you have all these uncertainties about the basic underpinnings of life itself? Then how do you effectively function in this life? And is it even like it seems like an almost turn you nihilistic, where you're like, what's the point of even trying to function properly in this life?
Yeah. Well, let's go back to another aphorism. No matter where you go, there you are. And what I mean by that is you have to live with yourself. And therefore, you have to feel like you're being true to yourself, which means you've got to have some basic values. I'm not sure a lot of people have actually laid out exactly what their basic values are. I mean, the closest they come is listening to what the preacher says on Sunday and adopting those things kind of thoughtlessly because the preacher says that's what God says, but they're not really things that they've thought out and made their own. So I guess my answer to the question is you just try to pursue what you define as good. So a good part of life is thinking about, well, what is good and what is evil?
So the way I think about that is that I see it's like three larger ethical frameworks. And one is, like you were saying, the preacher says, this is good behavior, this is bad behavior, this is a sin, this is a virtue. And, these are the rules. And then your pursuit of good is essentially around trying to not do any of the bad things and do lots of the good things. Like that's number one. And number two would be, based upon what works, kind of an end justifies the means approach. Like I can see in the world when I engage with things a certain way, I get this result. That result is good. So I'm going to pursue that. And then the third one is where it's more of a virtue ethics where, you do things regardless of the outcome, because they're the right thing. And the action, like your interaction with the world, is where virtue is found, or where the good is found, rather than in the results that are produced from that environment or from a third party, like a preacher telling you did a good job. So those are the three ways I see it. Is there another way to view that? What is good?
I guess almost everybody pursues what they think is good, uh, which means that sometimes they think it's actually good to be actively destructive of
Yes.
other living beings that may be harmless to them and objectively. They think it's actively good to lie because there's a greater good that lying and cheating and stealing and killing.
I'm sure those dumb kids who destroyed the Van Gogh painting the other day, I'm sure they thought they were doing something good.
Yes, of course. But they hadn't gotten to the root of things, which to me revolved around things like property rights, and it's a real problem. I mean, in point of fact, do we live on a prison planet because we've committed crimes and misdemeanors in other parts of the universe? But wait a minute. Now we got to ask ourselves, well, wait a minute. If that's true, that must mean that we're being reincarnated. And it seems to me that most religions in the past, until we got to the Abrahamic religions, have believed in reincarnation, frankly, where it's around of being born and dying again and so forth. Well, which is correct. I mean, nobody knows.
It goes back to the core question.
I've never met anybody that's come back from the other side.
So what's the so if you wherever you find yourself, there you are, or whatever that aphorism was. So we're here, and we, like all people, are going to try and pursue what we think is good, and we're going to have to just live with the consequences of that, essentially. Then how does one begin to define actually what is actually good?
Well, like I said, it's you have to assume a set of values, and
Assume a set of values. Yep.
the set of values that a doctrinaire communist might assume, or a doctrinaire uh, Mohammedan might assume, or that a doctrinaire Jew or Christian or Buddhist might assume, they're not necessarily the same values at all.
Well, those are handed down virtues. That goes back to the preacher from the pulpit saying this is good and this is bad. It's a handed down rule book, essentially.
Exactly. I don't like to take anybody's word for anything. I mean, I really don't. So it's very interesting to listen to all these views that other people have, but you have to arrive at these things by themselves. So what conclusions have I come up with? Well, it's that I like to perceive reality accurately, assuming reality exists. That's almost a contradiction in terms, but within that context, yeah, I like to perceive it accurately, and I do believe in basic things like my primary possession is myself, my own body. And if it's mine, nobody has a right to mess with it. And I don't have a right to mess with anybody else's body, or by extension, uh, their property, which is an extension of their body. So that when you're looking at this whole thing about what's good and what is evil in the material universe, which we're assuming for the moment is all that's here, I think a lot of it revolves around property rights. And property rights are given short shrift, and they're not acknowledged by most political systems in the world today. But I think if we're actually going to talk about these metaphysical things like good and evil, I think in the material world it boils down to property rights more than anything else.
But but to me, I'd say the idea of property rights is something that I would put in the whole category of virtue ethics. It's believing that a certain set of ideas are primary, and then behaving in a way based upon those ideas being good. But what seems to dominate everything today is this utilitarian philosophy where it's what works is what is good. What produces the most obvious material results is good. And it seems you don't see people being praised. You don't see a society holding up people who behave with virtue. You show people who held up who won, who managed to play a game a certain way and succeed, and like almost a game theory approach to business or whatever else, you know what I mean? Or a celebrity. It's not, we don't hold up people for virtue anymore.
You're absolutely right. Who is the political figure? And these political figures appear to rule the world. Which ones of them are lauded for being virtuous, actually?
I mean, you barely get them so they're acting in their people's interest in any way. So you know what I mean? I guess the best you could assume is when they're not actively working against their populace. But that's not even virtue. I think it's probably utilitarian.
We're actually talking about criminal personalities that are running other people's lives, and people accept that as being, well, that's the way things are. And virtue never comes into it. I mean, people never, it's a sad, listen, I don't know if we've answered the question. I think all you could do is address the question and talk about it and come to perhaps a few conclusions, which I think I've done. I think you've done. But most people don't think about it. Maybe they're just too busy trying to put day-to-day life to contemplate these things.
Yeah, I think so. I think it said, people rely on this handed down, the rule book, in order to know what's good and bad, and they're operating from there. And they don't have to put much thought into it. And within a proper functioning society, honestly, that rule book is a pretty good starting place, right? I mean, in a good functioning Western civilization, as you outlined the great differences in Western civilization, that basic rule book was great. It was a good starting point for humans and their interactions with each other to behave in an ethical way. But that seems to all completely dissipated along with all the other virtues of Western civilization.
Yeah. And one of the virtues of Western civilization is questioning everything in a rational manner. And that includes questioning the basic rule book in as rational a way as you can. So that's all you can do.
Okay. Well, let's ask the last part of his question, or his topic here was, what about free will and predestination?
Predestination. Well, does that mean that somebody has assigned destiny to me? Does that apply a God if you have predestination?
I think it would necessarily be the case that there's a God for there to be predestination.
Yeah, I think it would. And then you got to ask yourself, well, who is this God? Everybody just talks about God, but that's a generic term. There have been thousands of gods throughout history. So I always ask people, okay, well, if God has predestined you, which God do you mean? I mean, be precise, not just God.
Zeus, obviously, Zeus.
Well, maybe, or maybe it's Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah.
From the Watchmen. I mean, he decided to go off to a distant galaxy and create life. Then I guess he would be the God locally. And well, God, that's like, that must be like that way. But wait a minute. And I know they worked it out so that Yahweh relates to Jesus because he's his son and so forth. But wait a minute. How does he relate to Allah? Because Allah doesn't have a son. He's not the same as Yahweh. So it's a different God. It's, listen, it made so much more sense in classical times when religion, you gave cult. That's what they called it. You worship and you gave sacrifices. You visited the temple and all this type of thing of various gods. But that was different from philosophy. They were two totally separate things. And one of the problems with Christianity having taken over the world is it completely mishmashed philosophy and religion together.
Hmm.
And that's a real problem because, you know, then you had heretics. They didn't have heretics in those days. You could worship the God you wanted. No, that's fine. That's very interesting. And I'll worship my. And they didn't have religious wars
Hmm.
before the Abrahamic religions. So I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of the Abrahamic religions or their gods. I guess that would include Yahweh and Jesus and Allah and and the minor gods, that have replaced the old Roman and Greek gods. They're called saints today. We
Oh,
make
yeah.
statues to them. We pray to the saints. The way you'd pray to the a god who regulated the trees, or another god that regulated.
It's a very interesting contradiction in the Catholic faith in particular, isn't it? The saints.
It is. I mean, I grew up as a Catholic where they really try to program you. At least the Protestants. There's a little bit of free thinking involved there.
Depends upon where, but yeah. Okay. All right. Well, another topic this person suggested I thought was also very good. It's just
The same
same person. Yeah. He gave me a whole list of a bunch of ideas that he thought, rather than just taking questions for a whole bunch of questions in a row, that these topics could be expanded to even be just an entire episode each. And I thought it was great. So I'm going to go back and get more of these from our viewers because I find them fantastic. So this one, he asks about due diligence. Like, how do you measure and evaluate people, projects, and places to make the correct decisions in life?
Well, this is a paradox. On the one hand, the more you think about something and the more you try to think out not just the immediate and direct consequences or something, but the indirect and delayed ones, the better an answer, the wiser an answer you come up with. And that would include investments. And I've often violated that rule by kind of leaping before I looked. So I try and I still violate this rule for all kinds of reasons. I try to think things out as thoroughly as I can beforehand with investments. But with people, it may be a little bit different. And here's why I say that. It's that people always, or almost always, I think, put their best foot forward. They put on their game face. They, try to look as strong and happy and just generally good as they can. But that is perhaps just a social veneer. It is, the case of some people, a mask of sanity. So how can you tell what the real person is as opposed to the front that an actor, a good actor, competent actor would put up? What's the real person? And here's a trick that I've learned. It's not a trick, but it's a technique that I think works a lot. It's that first impressions. I think there's a lot to be said for first impressions. Why? Because if you catch somebody unawares, you ask them a question, you appear from out of nowhere and perhaps ask them a quick question to get a quick answer where they haven't had a chance to think out what their response would be and how they want to present themselves to you. Kind of a false face, well, maybe. It's first impressions are good because you cut through that social veneer and you get behind that mask of sanity. Because a lot of people are actually nuts. By nuts, I mean they're irrational. They don't have a foundation, a philosophical foundation upon which they build their lives. So, yeah, when judging people, I think catching them unawares, first impression, I think it's important. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so too. Did you ever read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink?
No, I haven't. I read the one about 10,000 hours.
Yeah, I can't remember which one that one is, but
Incidentally, I don't think it takes 10,000 hours to become competent in
I don't think so either. I don't think so either. I just think he does come up with these really interesting notions and does build a very entertaining case trying to prove it correct. So I think he's a good writer in that regard. I'm not sure he's the best thinker though. But the Blink one, if I recall, it was basically about that there's within the first moment of seeing a situation or a person, you form a model for them in your mind. You have a blink sort of response. In the blink of an eye, you form an impression of a person. And most often, he makes the case in that book, if I'm remembering it correctly, most often that blink view of a person is accurate. And that after that, you kind of are adding on layers of confusion, yourself and trying to understand the person.
Well,
Because
is he saying basically what I was trying to say then?
yes, exactly. Yes, exactly.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, so I find that's true too. And then I also think that I also try and look for the ways that they interact with other people because they'll like while I might not be able to catch them off guard because they might know I'm there and they might be managing my impression of them, but you can see the way they interact with other people. Whether it's a waitress in a restaurant or whether or not they hold the door for someone going into place or whatever. But you just those it's a real subtle sort of stuff that is not the attention of what's happening around you and often can tell you a lot about their character, I think.
That's a really good point. See how if they react differently with people that are below them in the power and money and
Yes,
scale, and how they react with people that are above them.
exactly.
You know, there's it's like there's this Romanian saying, uh, it's lick the hand you cannot bite. On the other hand, you could say bite the hand you cannot lick. But it's a certain view of the world
Yeah.
where if there's a hand out there, you got to either lick it or bite it. I mean, this is a very bent reality.
Yeah. Yeah, but it doesn't make sense though. And people do, I think, adopt one of those two approaches to things usually. They either go, oh no, against this party. And this goes back to the utilitarian ethical philosophy, I think, again, where they adopt is it better for me to assert my authority over this person? Or is it better for me to, voluntarily, temporarily subjugate myself before this person in order to get their approval? You know what I mean? And so I think, and it's all utilitarian oriented. And I think you can see through that pretty quickly. When you see inconsistencies, it isn't even like they treat the waiter badly or whatever. It's that they treat certain people differently. And that tells you that the person is managing all of these interactions with the world.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've always had trouble with hierarchies, where once that hierarchy is set up, you're supposed to treat the people below you this way and the people above you that way. Either bite their hands or lick their hands,
Yep.
depending which it is. And it's funny, I don't believe that democracy as a way of organizing things. Well, democracy as it's defined today. But yeah, on the other hand, I believe in giving people what they deserve. And of course, the problem is, well, what do they deserve? Well, you have to figure that out and so forth. But
Right. And so at first it starts off basically treating everybody with a form of respect, right? You have to until you know.
absolutely, it doesn't matter whether you're dealing with a saint or a gangster. I
Yep.
mean, you treat them with respect until you know what you're dealing with.
They
And
know they deserve disrespect.
well, you know, be polite and respectful, but disassociate as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Once you figure that one out.
Yeah. Yeah. Disassociation is the right way to do it. I agree. I agree. Okay. Well, that's interesting. So what's more dangerous though? What do you need to be more on guard for? Is it people or projects or, other investment decisions? Like what are the big decisions that can really sidetrack your life, like really screw it up? Is it fall in any one of those categories? Is it across the board?
Well, character flaws, I think they're very important, where a lot of people have fatal flaws where they keep running the same program and failing the same way. So it's better to associate with people that don't have any obvious character flaws, or if they have a character flaw, they recognize it and try to improve it.
Yeah, or orient their lives around it so that it isn't such a landmine for them. If you know you're not good at certain situations, maybe you're not super detail oriented, for instance, then you don't sign a contract without your lawyer there. I mean, you just set it up that way so you're not going to screw yourself over.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I know I've got strong suits and weak suits. So I try to play to my strong suits and stay away from the weak suits, which are likely to create trouble for me and other people. That's all you can do. Well, you can work on them, of course. But then again, you've got specialization and division of labor, where it's probably better to concentrate on making your strong. You just do the best you can. Exercise self-discipline. I mean, hey, what? You've got probably 80 years to dance upon the earth, and then what happens?
That's the question.
That's the big that's I mean, that's the big question of all these things. I mean, we're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic right now while we're still on this mortal plane. It's very important because it's all we know that's there. So it's very important.
Well, and as you know, some people argue that what we do here is going to determine what happens after death, right? So to a lot of people, in their basic view of the metaphysical understanding of the world, their conduct here is critical for how things will go after death. Well, true or not, that's how a lot of people operate in life.
Yeah. Well, okay, that's good. I mean, that gives them a reason not to, kill and rape and steal and pillage.
Yeah, there are other reasons, but I'll take that if that's what it takes.
That's right. I mean, that's okay. I think there's better reasons
Yeah.
to act ethically other than fear of punishment in a maybe afterlife. But I'll go with what I can get.
Exactly. Well, this gets us to his last one he had for us, which was what's your take on the end? It says death is coming for all of us. You can dodge taxes, maybe, but you can't dodge death. So how do you prepare?
I think it's important to dodge taxes because we are in the here and now. And, if you have any self respect at all, it's funny. All of these concepts that we've kind of tossed around just as like a one word thing, like self respect, you throw it out there. Maybe everybody's got somewhat different interpretations of what that means. But anyway, without going into a whole, going off on a tangent towards that, um, if you have any self-respect, you don't want to be, a slave. You don't want to be a victim.
Right.
You don't want arbitrary authority to tell you what to do and what you have to pay them. So, yeah, I think taxes are in themselves evil and they should be avoided and fought against. And you have no obligation moral to pay them. We can talk about that. Well, maybe there's some well, I don't know. But so that because he mentioned taxes.
Yep.
Okay. So I just wanted to deal with that. I don't accept taxes as part of the cosmic firmament.
Oh,
Okay. But what was the next part of the question?
Well, it says, but you can't dodge, you might be able to dodge taxes, but you cannot dodge death. So how do you prepare?
Of course, how could I forget that the basic question was how do you dodge death? Well, you got to ask yourself, is this all there is? And do you disappear when your physical atoms disassociate? And that's it? Or, you know, are you a spiritual being? Because a lot of people say, well, when you die, your soul goes to heaven. My soul goes to heaven or hell. So wait a minute. Well, where's my soul now? If I'm alive, am I different from my soul? When people, well, it's important when you use these words because it gets you thinking in certain ways. My soul, that's like distancing me from my spiritual reality, if
Mm.
any. Here's a better way of looking at it. At least I think it's a better way. It's that maybe you don't have a soul. Maybe you are a soul. And if there's a spiritual existence, maybe I'm just inhabiting this body right now. That's
Makes a
different
lot
from
more sense to
having,
me. Yes.
you know, I mean,
Having a soul is like having a hand.
yeah,
Right?
it's like having a hand. I'd miss my hand, but I could, I could live without it.
Exactly.
So is it the same if you have a soul? So maybe you got to decide, well, am I a spiritual being inhabiting a physical body? Well, if that's the case, oh, where did I come from? And could some other spiritual being have created me? I, I don't like, I don't buy that. I mean, maybe this kind of gets back to solipsism again, where maybe the whole universe is just a spiritual creation with sub atomic things that are listen, we just don't know about these things. Listen, this is kind of funny. I'm reading a book right now. I cannot recommend this book, I'm afraid. It is called The Last Lost World by a father and daughter theme of anthropologists and geologists. They're anthropologists, geologists. And it is a strange book. Uh, just can't recommend it for all kinds of reasons. But I started reading it because it's a book about the Pleistocene, which is the most recent geologic era, and there's one of the interesting things about this is, well, when did the Pleistocene start? What is the Pleistocene and why is it important? Well, it's important because it's the last geological era that we can determine after the Pliocene, which was before that. So what makes the Pleistocene, which we're still in really, different from others? It is the Ice Age. I mean, as best as we can tell, the planets had 3 or 4 major ice ages in the past, and this is the most recent one. And it's when Homo sapiens and other types of hominins arose, and really, it's quite interesting figuring out, well, where did men come from? How did they appear, and how does this relate to the world the way it is now? And listen, I'm going off on a tangent about this. What I'm trying to say is that we don't even really know what human beings are because we don't even know what the Neanderthals were like. I mean,
But if in your solipsism, in that view, you could, in that view, certainly be a spiritual being, correct?
maybe, yeah. I mean, listen, who was the famous scientist who said, "I suspect reality is not only stranger than we imagine, but stranger than we can imagine."
Yes.
And when you look at the leaps and bounds that science has made just in the last 100 years, I mean, it's like it beggars science fiction. Actually, we've actually think we've discovered anyway.
Especially with physics, all that stuff is so bizarre when you just get past the surface label, that you get past Newtonian physics essentially, and then you're like, wait, what? That sounds like magic. This does not sound like anything in the material realm at all.
Yeah, exactly. And here's another aphorism. I mean, I love these catchy phrases that people have said. And you remember, it's that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, and that's true. I mean, it's absolutely true. So
So so not knowing what exactly, obviously cannot know what happens after death, but how do you prepare for it nonetheless? I mean, every human must do it. It's something our culture, I think, you're not even ever supposed to talk about. You're not supposed to think about it. It's like we push all the dirty stuff in life kind of to the side, and death is a big part of that. So I just don't think many people are very close to death anymore, like thinking about it, and we don't have culturally a good way to process it. So how was it done in the past? I mean, how it seems to me that previous civilizations did a lot better job at preparing for death. Like the whole Viking book that you were just reading, I started reading that as well. Um, you know, it's Laugh While Dying or something.
life actually lie. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like that definitely totally different philosophy about how to prepare for death. Completely different. And seems a lot less timid, certainly, than our approach to it.
Yeah, it's actually kind of degraded the way people don't even use the term "he died,"
It's
or
passed away. Yeah.
they say he passed away. It's like passed away. Well, if you're dead, okay, now I can deal with that. But passed away,
There.
what does that mean? It's kind of like
How
evasive.
long did it take? Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and of course, you remember there was somebody that was promoting the meme where there was a book written some years ago that somebody tried to weigh bodies.
Soul. Yeah.
Yeah, and the soul weighed 1/32 of an ounce or something like that. Well, it all impressed me as bullshit. Quite frankly, nobody knows the answer to any of these things.
No. But do you have to have an answer to prepare for what every human absolutely always must deal with? I mean, do you have to have a clarity about what exactly is going to happen in order to embrace that in a dignified manner?
Well, I think it's a mistake to to be really certain about things that you can't be certain about. Like, you know, the Bible tells me this. Well, the Bible tells you 100 mutually exclusive and contradictory things. So, Bible's got lots of wisdom. It's got great poetry. Can be entertaining stories, etc., etc. And it's ancient, which is interesting because maybe when people were not surrounded by technology of all types, they had to just sit there and think more.
Hmm.
So there's there's some pluses to ancient wisdom, whether it's the Bible or whether it's things from the ancient Greeks. Or is there anything interesting before the ancient Greeks and the Bible? Hmm.
With the Bhagavad Gita, is that how you say that?
Yeah, the Bhagavad Gita, right, that the Indians came up with, and of course the Egyptians, uh, with their Book of the Dead and all that, and their civilizations were on since 3000 BC, and the Sumerians had stories from their founding, which roughly the same time, 3000 BC, 2500 BC.
And the Tao, I'd say, wasn't that that was certainly before the Abrahamic religions, right?
Yeah, that's right. That we're talking 500 BC, or roughly, with Buddha and Lao Tzu, and that's right. Uh, and actually, the Bible was put together at different times, but I think it was put together mostly around 500 to 1000 BC. Yeah, some later too.
Hmm.
Um, well, it's like we're just piecing this stuff together. Actually, I mean, science is just piecing this stuff together. Like we're trying to figure out, well, when did the first Homo sapiens actually appear upon the earth? You know, how does a new species start? And how does an old species go away? What happened to that last Neanderthal
Yeah.
who died out about 35,000 years ago? You know, did he feel bad about the fact that where are all those other people that kind of they go? You know, it's this is. But the thing is I think it's important to talk about these things, and we shouldn't get too wrapped up with what the price of gold is going to be, or even for that matter, whether or is Biden really going to start a nuclear war in the Ukraine? I mean, there are perhaps more important things than just dealing with what happens while you're alive. What happens after you die? And of course, I asked somebody once. I think it was my friend Bob, who was uh, who was Alan Watts' best friend. I said, Bob, what do you think happens? What do you think it's like after you die? And he said, well, what was it like before you were born? Well,
By
that's a pretty good answer.
Yeah. Yeah. So it seems like that's most likely. It's something like that.
that's that's right.
So you're right. It is more, I think it is a lot more important to think about, the metaphysical stuff more. But it's also, I think it's specifically very useful to think about that metaphysical stuff because it can give you a framework for how you can conduct yourself in the here and now successfully anyway, successfully by your own standards. I mean, we all humans, and this is one of the basic tenets in Stoicism, is that nobody ever does anything that they don't believe is good. And so I think it goes back to something you said earlier. And you can take the most evil person, like the most disgusting, terrible human being, and I think that in their mind, what they're doing is actually good. It's not evil; it's actually good. So,
Yep.
so we are like hardwired to pursue what we think is good, and it's up to us though to decide what that good is, to adopt a value system that actually feels right to us. That is that enables us to operate successfully in the world. And I think all these really unanswerable metaphysical questions actually do lead to practical answers about now, what to do now, how do you live today.
And I know we're going to get comments to those people that have stuck with this far, where they're going to quote the Bible,
Yep.
you know, something out of the New Testament or the Old Testament, as if that's the authority, and why don't you read this and convert to Jesus, all the rest of this type of thing.
Or they'll just tell you to stick with finance, Doug. I like that.
Yeah,
So
well,
that's fine.
that's right. Okay, yeah. Well, hey, thank you very much for your opinion. And
Yeah, and I'm sure the person who gave the opinion was probably not a theologian, by the way. Just guessing.
right, exactly. Well, it's just a question of what you think is important in life.
Yeah.
Okay, and I I used to I used to amuse myself by when I'd meet somebody that was religious and sincere, kind of taking apart their religious views and showing them or attempting to explain to them what I thought of their foibles and illogics. And I don't do that anymore because, everybody needs something to get them through the night. And, if something that your preacher told you serves that purpose, okay. I hope, that there's more things to look at than what he told you, but I don't want to destroy the stable bit data on which somebody may have be building the foundation of their life. Even if
Especially since a lot of it does lead to actually like lots of how you behave and conduct yourself in the real world. There's lots of overlap with exactly what you would think anyway. You know what I mean? So they can have that belief system, which you can point at lots of problems with it, but the way it manifests itself in their conduct can often be, 'cause again, lots of ethical overlap in behavior. So what's the point of debating something that there's no answer to, you know?
yeah, yeah, it makes absolutely no sense at all to debate religion. I mean, listen, when I'm talking with a true believer in religion, I never, I don't want to get antic with them for all kinds of reasons, but I just like to ask questions and see how they answer them. I mean, you might learn something, but certainly learn something about that person. But debating and arguing, totally pointless and counterproductive, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think there just should be a lot more humility about these clearly unanswerable questions. Like it's hard to imagine that the most devout Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, whatever, wouldn't at some point have some, you know, wouldn't if a really intelligent and thoughtful person wouldn't admit that they have some doubts about some things along the way. It's only rational to. So, treating others with a little humility goes a long way, I think. Treating these ideas with some humility.
Yeah, I mean, we all want and respect certainty, but if you think rationally, well, how can you really be certain about anything? I mean, since physicists can't even be certain about the nature of physics.
Yeah. That something doesn't exist unless you see it that it exists. I mean, how bizarre is that?
Yeah.
So
So what are we going to do now? We're going to go back to talking from talking about the cosmic to we can talk about
practical.
the big picture, and then we can talk about well, what stock do you buy tomorrow? So it's all important in its own context, so.
It is all important, but well, next time we have questions I hope people will ask more of these, these metaphysical sort of esoteric type questions, because they actually are a lot more fun to think about and talk about, I think. But I understand, we respond to the headlines like anyone else.
I agree. And as we were saying, most people don't talk about these things very often because it's a scary subject, perhaps. And it's a hot button subject for a lot of people where they feel, the basis of their life might be threatened. So
Yes, when your identity is wrapped up into a worldview, it's kind of sound like a woke person, honestly, if that's the case. But if your identity is wrapped up in it, it's very difficult to even be exposed to ideas that threaten your identity. It's really tough.
yeah. And I've thought about, well, it'd be wonderful if instead of living 7 years or whatever people generally live these days, it would be nice if Ray Kurzweil is right and the singularity presents itself in 20 years or whatever, and we can live several hundred years or more or less as long as we'd like. But, it doesn't solve the ultimate problem. It just puts it off for a bit. And anyway, if you die and go to heaven, I mean, I'm not sure what heaven is like, really. I mean, you've got this, heaven for a Muslim is, doe-eyed houris and eating grapes and, being in luxury. I get tired of that after a few days of vacation, frankly. And then you think, well, wait a minute, how long is this going to go on? Is it going to go on for 10 years or 1,000 years? How about 1,000,000 years? But wait a minute. The best that we can tell is that the universe is going to last at least 1,000,000,000,000. In fact, there's speculation that it might last 1,000,000,000,000,000,000 years, which is, if you do the math, that's a long, long time before all the stars burn out. And then what happens? So where's heaven? Are you still, eating grapes with dark-eyed houris if you're a Muslim? Or I don't know what Christians are very uncertain about what happens in their heaven, aren't they? I mean,
Yeah, there's definitely less clarity on that. Like, I don't have it. There's no good visualizations that I have in the same way I do for what I imagine a Muslim heaven is.
yeah, the church taught us when we were kids that, well, you get to be with God. Well, okay.
Theoretically sounds fine.
I guess. I mean, but wait a minute, is that the guy with the beard, or is that Jesus? I hope it's not the Jesus like is represented in South Park. Oh, this often occurs. I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to
People
know.
take these things so seriously.
But doesn't physics have a problem even demonstrating that time is even real?
Yes.
So maybe your billions and trillions of years thing, maybe that's a figment of our current concept to this material construct.
Exactly. A lot of physicists are talking about, does the arrow of time really just go one way? And as impossible as it seems, could it be reversed? Well, since we're just babes in the woods, where mankind has just started really exploring these concepts very, very recently, who knows? Further proof for, I think, my essentially solipsist view of the universe.
Seems to be more and more valid the more time goes on, as far as I'm concerned, Doug. So
Yeah. Yeah, that and $10 will get me a cup of coffee in Tokyo, which I thought it used to be funny when I used to say that, but not that, and $10 won't even get me a cup of coffee at Starbucks. Forget about Tokyo.
exactly. Exactly. Okay. Well, we'll leave it here, and we'll be back with Q&A on Friday, and hopefully we'll get some of these metaphysical type questions along with the headline questions that we normally get.
And maybe we'll get some metaphysical answers.
Answers, even better.
Jeez. That'd be
That
nice.
would be nice. All right. Thanks, Doug. I appreciate it. It was fun.
Thanks, man.